Hey, welcome to another episode of Mike's Collection. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that we're going to be talking about today is the G.I. Joe Collector Club's figure subscription service 5.0 that was released in 2017. So I've done a series of videos where I've reviewed the first 4 figure subscription services, and there was 8 in total, so you'll see a few more after this. But basically, every year, sometimes they crammed 2 in a year, the G.I. Joe Collectors Club would offer up a figure subscription service where you could order figures through the mail. You would get shipments of 2 figures over the course of 6 months. And then in the final shipment, with your last 2 figures, you would get a 13th mystery figure, which the identity of which was not known in advance. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the 13 figures from FSS 5. So in the first shipment of Figure Subscription Service 5.0, we get Charbroil. So this is Charbroil version 6. And he is based on the 1988 original Charbroil figure. Now this is not the first Charbroil we get in the modern era. We actually got our very first Charbroil in the G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra movie-based line. Now Charbroil didn't appear in the movie, but they did make some figures kind of in the same movie aesthetic. So I actually thought this was a pretty cool version of Charbroil. I actually really like the reflective lens used on his goggles there. But as cool it is, I grew up playing with these guys in the 80s, and I like to have versions that are true to their original incarnations. So the first kind of classically designed Charbroil we got came in the 2013 convention box set, which was Night Force themed. So you'll see here we get Night Force Charbroil. So this was based on the version 2 vintage figure, which came in the Night Force colors. So this was a pretty nice rendition of that figure. Now, like the original 88 Charbroil and the Night Force repaint, he has a removable helmet. And this one does. And he's a red head, just like he was in the vintage line. Now, this head was, I believe it was originally appeared on a G.I. Joe Lamprey figure. Now, what's odd is, for whatever reason, for this version, rather than give him the same head, they just gave him a masked head. Which I'm fine with, actually. Like, I'm glad that we have the unmasked head there, but I actually never really liked Charbroil's unmasked head. It was a weak point of the vintage figure. I actually thought he was really cool with his helmet on, but then he looked kind of dorky underneath the helmet there, and that kind of diminished the character a little bit for me. Had he had the ski mask head underneath there in the vintage figure, I probably would have liked this character even more. But anyway, this is a great figure. I really like the flame effect that comes with the flamethrower. All the accessories are appropriate. And yeah, we knew we would get this figure because if you recall, if you saw my last video, the 2013 convention set contained 6 G.I. Joes in their Night Force colors. And they were all characters that we didn't have in the modern era line yet, like Muskrat and Spearhead and Repeater. And we got the classic colored versions of all of them in Figure Subscription Service 4. Charbroil, for some reason, was the only character that they held on to and waited for Figure Subscription 5. So yeah, I'm glad we got him, and it is a nice figure. And along with Charbroil, we get Viper version 29. Now this is based on Viper version 4 from 1994 in the vintage line. And this guy turned out pretty good. Although, I'm not a fan of this look, really. The first version of the Viper that came out in the 80s looked like this. This is the modern era version of it. And as far as I'm concerned, this was a perfect design right out of the gate. That is what a Viper should look like. But then I had stopped collecting G.I. Joe by 1994 when they released Viper version 4, which was this total redesign with the new helmet. And yeah, it is a step backwards for sure. But for this figure being what it is, a recreation of that 94 figure, it does a very good job. Now that 94 figure was repainted by the Collectors Club in one of their O-ring style sets into a new Iron Grenadier character called the Iron Anvil. And funnily enough, the Collectors Club actually produced the Iron Anvil first. So they put this guy out in their Iron Grenadier themed set of 2015. And so the body is different, but this was the first time we got this kind of head sculpt in the modern era. And so now this guy is a repaint of him when, funnily enough, he was a repaint of him back in the vintage line. But yeah, all in all, kind of a goofy looking figure, kind of goofy colors. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But yeah, it's a good representation of that 1994 figure. In the second shipment of FSS5, we got Scoop. So this is Scoop version 2. The only version of Scoop we've ever gotten since the 1989 original. And you'll see here some of his accessories. He did come with guns as well. But here he's got a camera and a microphone. And that's because Scoop is an embedded reporter. And when he was first introduced in the cartoon series, he was actually like a double agent working for Cobra. But again, at face value, this is a good figure. The issue being, so the vintage Scoop from '89 that this figure is based on, he did have kind of a big oversized helmet, which was kind of silly in retrospect. But at the time, it worked for him and he had an original head sculpt. This time around, he's got a reused head from this version of Airborne. And this Airborne was from the 2016 convention set. And at the time, this head was unique to this Airborne, and it worked for him. But then we got it again for Scoop, and we've got it twice more since on the new versions of Blizzard, both the standard and the Tiger Force versions. And another thing that's kind of odd is the vintage Scoop was wearing a yellow jumpsuit and kind of a much more traditional green, where this guy's got an orange jumpsuit and a bluish helmet and vest. And I'm just not sure why the club would go that way. Like, there was only one version of this character to base this figure on. I don't know why you wouldn't have just kept him yellow. So like I said, at face value, this looks pretty good. There's nothing wrong with them. The parts work well together. The accessories are neat. But if Scoop was my favorite Joe, I would be a little disappointed. The fact that he's got a reused head. It's not super accurate to the vintage line. And the colors are wrong as well. And along with Scoop, in the second shipment, we got Ambush version 4. So you'll see here, Ambush. He's got lots of neat accessories, a lot of soft goods, which we don't see a lot with G.I. Joe. He's got kind of an interesting face there, some unique facial hair. He reminds me a lot of Abraham from The Walking Dead there. So this was the first Ambush in the modern line, so it was good to get a new character. Now, even though you might think that face is pretty unique, and it actually does work quite well for Ambush, it's actually a reuse of this head, and this was a new head that the club created for their 2013 convention set. So General Mayhem, the same set that gave us the Iron Anvil. So the change in hair color actually does a lot to make these guys not look like twins. Plus they both have helmets, which kind of keep them looking a little distinct as well. So at a glance here, Ambush is a pretty successful figure. But I gotta tell you, he's one of my least favorites from all the figure subscription services. Partly I don't have any ties to the character. I didn't have the 1990 original that this is based on when I was a kid. But also, and I don't know if this was an afterthought to hide the air, because right now it looks okay. But if you really look at him, the distance between his shoulders and his chin, it's a pretty good gap there. He's got to have a pretty long neck, and he does. So yeah, they gave us this scarf here. Again, I don't know if the intent was always to give him that scarf, or if they realized after the fact that they had to give him a little something, because he had just a really long neck. And I'll be honest, it doesn't look as bad as I remember it looking at it right now. But yeah, at the time, that was a pretty big problem. But problems aside, again, it's always nice to get a new character in the modern era. So this is Ambush. In the third shipment, we got Darklon version 3. So this version of Darklon is based on the 1989 original. And he is a strange looking character. I never had the original when I was a kid. But he's like Destro's cousin or something, I believe. That's why he's got the Mars case there. An interesting gun, I think, which was based off of his vintage gun. Also got the sword in the back here, and this comes out. So yeah, with his look, you'll see there he's got like, looks like a ribbed turtleneck sweater. And yet his mask, so he's got this kind of like Darth Vader-esque mask on with red eyes. It's hard to know if that's, I guess, a ski mask or something he's wearing, but he almost looks like he could be reptilian or something. The orange thigh-high boots with the red tiger stripe pants. The shoulder pads kind of coming out of nowhere. This double shoulder pads over here. He's a weird looking dude. And so I have mixed feelings about getting this figure in the figure subscription service, to be honest with you, because, like I said, this is version 3. The original came out in 1989, and that was the only Darklon in the vintage line. Darklon did not get any versions in the new sculpt era of the early 2000s. But we did get a version. So version 2 of Darklon came out in 2012. And this is also a collector club figure. Now this was a convention figure, not a subscription service. So you had to go to a convention to get this guy. And you'll see here, they haven't really changed up his design. It seems like this is the best they could do to recreate the vintage look at the time. And maybe they got a little closer with it this time. Which one is better is debatable, I guess. But the head sculpt is the same. So they created a new head sculpt for this version, which they reused for the figure subscription version. So he still has the shoulder pads, the green sweater, the red pants, the orange boots. But the thing is, this was a very sought-after figure. And yeah, if you weren't able to get him at the convention, you had to buy him on the secondary market on eBay or something. And he started going for hundreds of dollars. So to acquire him, it cost quite a bit of money. And I got him as a gift from Vanessa. And so I'm not sure exactly what she paid for him, but I would guess somewhere in the, getting close to $200 probably for this little guy. And as a Joe fan, I want all Joe fans to be able to get the characters they wanted. Maybe some people thought the 89 Darklon was their favorite figure and they just didn't have $200 to get him. So to get the figure subscription service figure, it's still pretty expensive. But it allowed fans that wanted a Darklon to get Darklon, and this one's probably even more vintage accurate than this guy is. So I'm happy for fans that were able to get their hands on a Darklon. But for people that paid top dollar for this, thinking this was the only Darklon that we were going to get, this one does tend to bring the value of the other guy down a little bit. And maybe we shouldn't have spent $200 to get him. So yeah, in regards to this figure, I think it's a successful version of Darklon, who is a total mishmash Frankenstein looking figure. I didn't really need this figure because I was content with this one. And like I said, a part of me was a little disappointed that another version was coming out. But for those fans that really wanted a Darklon, I think this one is pretty cool. It suits all the needs, and you don't need to waste your time and money seeking this guy out anymore if you managed to get this one. So along with Darklon in the third shipment, we got Salvo version 3. And this is based on the 1990 original Salvo. Relatively simple design. Now, he actually did come with a big missile launching gun, but yeah, I didn't really care for it. I don't think it stayed in his hand very well, so I've thrown it in the extra parts bucket. So right now he's just carrying around the suitcase that he came with, as well as he's got his holstered pistol there. But yeah, if you were thinking Salvo should have a big gun, don't worry, he did have a big gun. It wasn't quite as crazy as the figures that came with the 1990 original, which were two huge, intense missile firing weapons. But the club did the best they could to kind of recreate that a little bit. Now, Salvo had a pretty unique helmet back in the vintage line, and a lot of people probably would have thought to give us a modern era Salvo, they would have had to create a whole new piece. But they actually managed it pretty well without any new pieces. So underneath this helmet here, oh shit, 1 second. Well, I could pause this and get his head figured out, but yeah, some of these helmets that I haven't removed in a while are on there pretty good. Anyway, underneath there, he's got Hit and Run's head. So it was a head that the club created for the newer versions of Hit and Run, which was in Figure Subscription Service 4, as well as their Night Force set. And then the helmet is actually Sci-Fi's helmet. So, yeah, the two actually work pretty well together to give us a decent version of Salvo. With any of these club figures, the club shows us a prototype mock-up for the figures before the pre-order window goes up. So they usually, over the course of a couple of weeks, show us a figure every couple of days to get us excited about the set. And then once they've revealed all the figures, other than the 13th mystery figure, they give us a month or so to put up the money for the pre-order. So fans are pretty finicky in the G.I. Joe world, and they always have something critical to say about pretty much every figure that goes up. But when they posted Salvo, it seemed like the fans really freaked out, because the Salvo they were originally going to give us was scrawny looking, and Salvo is supposed to be a big dude. So the fans got really vocal with the Collectors Club, and they actually went back to the drawing board and gave us a new build for Salvo. So I'm just glad about that. So this is a much nicer build. The one issue I do have with it is these pants, which I think were originally on a Duke, one of the movie Dukes based on Channing Tatum. Is he's got these cuffs on his bottom of his pants, which really kind of hinder the way he stands. I find he falls backwards a lot, and he doesn't stay on his stand so good because of the cuffs. But otherwise, I'm really happy that they gave him a big, bulkier body. And overall, I'd say Salvo is a success. Now, next up, we have General Flagg. And for those Joe fans in the know, this is General Flagg Jr. General Flagg Sr. was a character in the comic books who led G.I. Joe, but he was killed. And he did not get a figure in the vintage line, but his son, General Flagg Jr., did. And so that first General Flagg figure came out in 1992, and then they re-released him again in new color in 1993. So this figure, this is the first version of General Flagg in the modern era, and for some reason they based it on the 1993 repaint rather than the 1992 original. I don't really have strong feelings about it one way or the other. They're both good looks. Pretty much the first version had a brown bomber jacket. This one has black. I think I actually probably prefer the black jacket. Maybe they thought the brown jacket would look a little too much like General Hawk. But I like this figure a lot. Now, as far as his head, you might recognize this head sculpt here. This is Airborne's head. And in my last video, I showed you all the many characters that have reused this head in the past. But it's such a good generic head, and as long as you change the hair color, and especially when you give him a a hat, you don't really notice so much that he looks like 6 other guys on your shelf. And I actually think that head works pretty good for General Flagg. It's a young looking face, and knowing that this is General Flagg Jr., I think it works for him pretty nicely. So next up is Sneak Peek version 4. Now, the reason I've got General Flagg still hanging around here is I want to show you. So this generic head of theirs that they used for him is the same head that was used on Sneak Peek. So you'll see here, these guys could basically be identical twins, just a slight change in the hair color. So, as I mentioned, I don't really mind them reusing heads, especially if I think it works for the character, and I like this head for both of these guys. I do find it odd, though, that the club could choose whatever shipping order they wanted to with these things. So to include these two characters with the exact same head in the same shipment seems a little odd. It kind of draws attention to it a little bit more. But overall, it's not a big gripe for me. Some other people are probably bothered by it worse than I am, but whatever. Anyway, so Sneak Peek here. As I mentioned in a prior video, we got the Tiger Force version of him first in the last figure subscription service. And Sneak Peek was a favorite character of mine when I was a kid, and I was really hoping to get a version of him in the modern era. So I was kind of surprised to get the Tiger Force version first. I like this figure a lot, even though it's not based on any toy I had as a kid, because it was only released in the UK in Tiger Force colors. But I liked it a lot. And if this happened to be the only Sneak Peek figure I got, then so be it. But everybody was pretty sure that they were going to re-release this figure in Sneak Peek's classic 1987 colors. And sure enough, the next year they did. And that's this figure here. So he shares all the same parts as the Tiger Force version, except now he's just wearing his red and gray. His periscope there is repainted, or remolded, I guess, in the kind of bright green that the vintage one had. He's got the same accessories there. You'll see rifle, binocular, probably a couple other pieces there that I don't have handy. And the same helmet as well. All works really well for Sneak Peek. And again, seeing as he's one of my my favorite vintage Joes, I think this is a great update of him. It's one of the, I don't want to say very few, but it's one of the times when I think the modern era figure is a lot better than the vintage line. So I'm glad that they made him a little cooler than he was back in the day. And yeah, I'm really happy with this figure. So in the 5th shipment, we got Gaucho version 2. And if Gaucho looks familiar, that's because he is a repaint of Gung Ho, and it's pretty obvious because Gung Ho had such a very distinct look. So you might be wondering, what's the deal with Gaucho then? Well, the original 1983 Gung Ho was repainted and given a new name when he was released in the UK, and they called him Gaucho. So that was similar to other figures you've seen in my past videos, such as Quarrel, who was a UK figure that was a repaint of the original Scarlet, and Bombardier, and TNT. So those figures all had the silver bases, which designated them as UK characters, and so Gaucho has the matching silver base. And just like the vintage one was a repaint of Gung Ho, so is this one. So here is the 2015 50th anniversary version of Gung Ho, and this is an amazing figure. Gung Ho was one of the very first figures we got when the modern era started in 2005. It started with a 5-pack of Joe characters and a 5-pack of Cobra characters, and Gung Ho was one of the 5 in the G.I. Joe pack, and he was pretty weak. Not a great figure. And we got a couple of versions of Gung Ho since then. Most of them were using that same head on the original. He had kind of a scrawnier build. Anyway, this one fixes all the problems. I think everybody loves this figure. He had a new head sculpt. He looked great. Big, muscly body. He's perfect. So, while I didn't necessarily need it again, because, again, I have no childhood attachment to Gaucho. He was only released in the UK, and I wouldn't mind so much if maybe he had a different head on the same body, or maybe he at least had a blonde mustache or something. But he just looks way too much like Gung Ho. Just looks like Gung Ho and changed his vest, and that's about it. So given the cost of these figures, I really don't necessarily like having to pay that much for just a change of clothing for a character I already have. But considering how great this figure is, you could do a lot worse. So to get another version of him, I'm okay with. And just a few things that help differentiate him. You'll notice his skin tone is a lot darker, and the tattoo on his chest. I don't know if we can get too much detail in there, but it is different than the tattoo on Gung Ho's chest. So yeah, I always like getting these UK figures. I wish there was a little more that differentiated these two, but it's a great build, and yeah, a good figure overall. So along with Gaucho, we got Xamot version 8, and you'll notice on his display base there it says Shattered Glass Xamot. I'll explain to you what that is in a second. But so Xamot is one of the Crimson twins who lead the Crimson Guard, who's like a small little sub-team of Cobra. And so the vintage figures had them in these crazy kind of acrobatic, pretty garish outfits, which I love, but they're pretty out there. And if you don't know Tomax and Xamot, the whole deal with these guys is you'll notice their names are the same, just mirror images of one another. The figures themselves are mirror images of one another. Their sash run the opposite sides. They've got shoulder pads on the opposite side. Their hair is parted on the opposite side. So, and in the cartoon and stuff, they could feel each other's pain. So if you punch Xamot, Tomax would feel it. So the only thing that separated these two was Xamot had this scar on his cheek there. So the vintage figures had them in these outfits, which was fine. The only thing is when they appeared in the cartoon, they kind of ran the public face of Cobra. And so they were the CEOs of extensive enterprises, and they were often seen in suits in the cartoon. So this version here, this captures the look of the suits that they wore in the cartoon, right down to the little flower on the lapel there. But yeah, the colors are very accurate to the cartoon. So even though they have given us suited versions of Tomax and Xamot in the new sculpt era of the early to mid 2000s, they weren't the most successful versions because they took Headman's body and he wore kind of a zoot suit with double breasted. It just didn't really look right. So this suited version of Xamot is much better. However, this figure is not a total success, and you can probably see that just by looking at him. For one, this vest does not stay sealed very well. These modern era figures, jackets don't work so well for them because this is removable. But the sleeves, so you can kind of see there, like if you take the jacket off, he's still got blue jacket sleeves with the white cuffs, and then he would just have the white dress shirt. So it's not an ideal way to make these. It's a little, if you were to lose the jacket, he would look really strange. Now this was a brand new head sculpt, and yeah, this was the only new head sculpt in this figure subscription service, I believe. And it's a little big, especially when you compare it to these guys here. If he's supposed to be the same character, his head is like doubled in size. So while it's okay, it could have been better. And so as for the Shattered Glass, what that was all about, in the comic book published by the Collectors Club in their monthly newsletter, Shattered Glass was an alternate universe, and their version of Xamot in there was actually just a single guy. He didn't have a twin brother named Tomax, but when he looked in the mirror, he had a split personality, and he would speak to Tomax in the mirror, kind of like Willem Dafoe talking to the Green Goblin in the first Spider-Man movie. So I don't think the plan was to ever really give us a Tomax. That's why the base specifically says Shattered Glass Xamot. But, of course, the fans got vocal again and said, well, you can't give us Xamot in a suit and not give us Tomax. So, sure enough, we did get Tomax. You'll see the hair is parted a different way. The flowers on the opposite lapel. But we did get Tomax eventually, but I'll talk about him in a future video. So again, this here's Xamot. I appreciate that the club made him. It's cool to have these guys in a suit, but it has its issues. It's kind of a weird construction. Another thing to mention is these hands are awful. These are not human hands in any way. And both of the Crimson Brothers here, they came with suitcases, the same suitcases I've probably showed you a few times already that had money in them and stuff. But their hands are just not able to hold them because they're so mangled. So, an okay figure, but not great. So in the 6th and final shipment of FSS 5, we got Steel Raven version 1. Now, just pop her head up there. She's got the eye patch. Kind of a unique look. Her body is made up of, I think, a couple of different Baroness parts. This jacket was featured on one of the movie figures from Rise of Cobra. But yeah, it's a little hard to tell what's going on. I don't know if her jacket's supposed to be one long sweeping trench coat and they just kind of pieced it together. Otherwise, that's kind of you'll see it's kind of a separate skirt piece, separate from her jacket. So yeah, it's kind of a weird design. And then she's wearing that same hat you saw on General Flagg, except this one's got the logo for Scar on there. And what Scar is if you recall in one of my prior reviews, they gave us a figure of now his name's escaping me right now, but the leader of Scar, which was the replacement of Cobra in the G.I. Joe Extreme line. So after the vintage G.I. Joe line came to an end, they rebooted G.I. Joe called G.I. Joe Extreme with larger, shittier figures, and Scar was the bad guy. So the Collectors Club gave us one of the Scar figures, Iron Claw, that's his name. So they gave us an Iron Claw figure who was the leader of Scar in a previous set. Now, I don't think Steel Raven had been established in the G.I. Joe Extreme line prior. I know she didn't have a figure, but she may have appeared in the short-lived comic book. I can't say for certain. But she did appear in the Collectors Club magazine, the comic book that they do. And so she might have been an original creation by the club. But yeah, so they had kind of given us a few storylines with her for the months leading up to this, so we weren't necessarily shocked to get a figure of her. And for those of you who are fans of the comic book and the Collectors Club magazine, then yeah, this was probably a cool figure to get. So as I said, her body is a reuse of Baroness parts. The head is actually, it comes from Crimson Asp, which was a unique character they gave us in their 2003 box set. So while Steel Raven is kind of a neat character from an obscure little corner of G.I. Joe, she was not a figure anybody was clamoring for. And, they probably could have used the spot for somebody a little more interesting. But overall, it's not a bad figure, and I don't mind adding basically what I would consider a brand new character to the line every once in a while, as it keeps it from getting too stale. So yeah, Steel Raven, she's okay. So along with Steel Raven in the 6th shipment, we also got Raptor version 2. And this is based on the original 1987 Raptor. And Raptor is the Cobra Falconer and Accountant. So to the untrained eye, this figure might look completely stupid, and I would understand that take. But Raptor is one of those unique characters from the vintage line. We were kids when these figures came out. You didn't question it too much. He had such a weird look with that bird cowl on top of his head, and he had soft goods like cloth wings, and he came with a falcon that latched onto his arm. It was a pretty unique figure. And, as a kid, I kind of loved the weirdos like that. And he was a character that fans really hoped to see for a long time, but we didn't think it would ever happen. Mostly because the club invests some money into creating new parts every once in a while, so it's possible they could have sculpted a new head for us. But the wings would have been pretty elaborate and hard to recreate, and you couldn't really give us Raptor in the modern era without giving us wings. However, this here is the Jungle Viper figure that we got a few years ago from Hasbro. So Hasbro invested the money to give this guy this crazy jungle camo, which folds up and allows him to use his crazy long sniper rifle. And yeah, so this was a newly created character that that Hasbro made in the modern line, which didn't happen a lot. They gave us a few new figures, but mostly these figures were recreations of vintage figures. So yeah, this was kind of a neat figure, and the club thought, well, we could reuse that jungle camo to give us Raptor. So it doesn't have all the pieces, but this works out really well. I think this is actually much cooler than the old cloth wings that the vintage figure had. Now, as far as the rest of them, there's not a whole lot of new parts there. You might think, well, the Falcon with the removable little hood would probably be new, but he's not. They actually made a Zartan figure during the Pursuit of Cobra line in 2010, which I kind of thought was Hasbro's way of kind of giving us an update to Raptor, because it was Zartan, but he had a hood and he had a bird. He didn't have the wings or anything, but there's just something about his aesthetic that kind of looked like a Raptor knockoff. And I think a lot of people accepted that maybe I'll just display this version of Zartan and call him Raptor in my collection. I didn't bother picking up that version because I already had a good classic looking Zartan, and I didn't really like this kind of half-assed Raptor. But they used a lot of those parts, which makes sense, to give us this Raptor. So this is actually the Zartan head they used. But what they did is they took the bird-headed cowl from the vintage 87 figure and resculpted it to give us that piece there. And yeah, these feet here, which I think were kind of meant to be snowshoes on another figure, they kind of work really well to give him these talons on his boots. And yeah, overall he just looks great. He's got the little bird whistle as well. And yeah, this was a highlight of this figure subscription service. I think one of the neater figures we got in any of the figure subscription services. And when I did my top toys of the year list on my blog that year, he was ranked pretty high up there, because this is a really cool figure. And the 13th mystery figure was G.I. Jane version 2. So this figure is based on a 2006 figure from the New Sculpt years. But G.I. Jane's origins go back a lot farther than that, actually. G.I. Jane was the name of the first female doll back in the old 12-inch doll line. Before G.I. Joe, the characters didn't really have unique names. It was essentially just soldiers in interchangeable outfits, and you could put the same guy in a scuba outfit or a pilot outfit or whatever. So then they gave us a military nurse, and she was known as G.I. Jane, and they took that character and kind of reworked her into the modern Real American Hero G.I. Joe line. But she never got a figure until 2006, and then we got this modern update in the figure subscription service. So the head is not unique. It first appeared on Agent Helix here. And we got it again on the female version of Dial Tone. So we have this head a couple of times, but they all have different colored hair. And it's kind of a basic enough haircut that they're not immediately recognizable as twins. I like the outfit. It is just a good basic military, no frills outfit, which could make this seem kind of unexciting as a 13th mystery figure. Like Raptor would have been an amazing 13th mystery figure. Fans would have been really excited to get him as a surprise. Whereas G.I. Jane is kind of understated, but she was a new character to the modern era, and yeah, I was really happy to get her. She also came with a trench coat, it was a lab coat, just a white coat that overhung her shoulders and stuff. But as I pointed out on like Tomax and Xamot, sometimes the jackets look a little weird because you could clearly tell that the sleeves weren't connected to the jacket, which they would have been in real life. So it kind of looked like a big, long, sleeveless lab coat, which didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, so I just decided to scrap that altogether. That's in the spare parts bin. So yeah, that's G.I. Jane. And that's the end of Figure Subscription Service 5. So those are the 13 figures from Figure Subscription Service 5.0. And yeah, so stay tuned for another video. I'll be doing FSS 6 pretty soon. But if you liked this video, please hit the like button below. Please comment and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and until next time.